Thank you and welcome to the United States of Trauma panels hosted by South by Southwest. I'm your moderator, Dr. Rob Carpenter, and today we have two legendary, phenomenal educators, former Secretary of Education, Mr. Arne Duncan, and Chairman of the Special Olympics, Dr. Timothy Shriver. Right now, our nation is facing a crisis. Our children are facing a crisis. Our teachers are facing a crisis. Suicide rates are at an all-time high for youth. Depression rates are an all-time high for youth. Self-harming rates are an all-time high for youth. And the CDC estimates that about 60% of kids under 18 are facing trauma. So clearly this is a crisis that is something that we need to address now. And so, Tim, I just want to jump right into this. Trauma has been an issue that's been affecting our kids for a long time. But with COVID-19, the polarization of our country, and the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm curious if you can speak to the trauma that is facing our kids now and why it's important to talk about it now more than ever.
Yeah, well, the statistics are sobering. Sadly, they've been sobering for quite some time. Our children have been in distress for quite some time, for years, if not decades. The rates and the data on substance abuse, on dropout, on teen violence and dropout, on anxiety, depression, despair, addiction, these are bad trend lines, and they've been bad for a long time. So trauma is a relatively new word in our popular vocabulary, but it's not a new phenomenon. And for really some time, schools have been trying to adapt to the reality that children feel increasingly unsafe in their homes and in their communities. Children feel increasingly unheard and misunderstood in their schools and in their communities. And children, as a result of feeling unheard and unsafe, often victims of oppressive situations and cultures, but also victims of violence, circumstance, poverty, a major driver of trauma. That when children don't feel seen, heard, understood, and they're harboring deep wounds, it makes it almost impossible, almost physically impossible for them to learn. The neuroscience tells us this. The brain just shuts down when trauma overwhelms the system, when the absence of supports and capabilities to feel safe are there. The brain just doesn't work, not to mention the heart, the soul, the mind, the inspiration, the hunger for learning that we like to associate with children, but too frequently are a distant dream. So we're in the midst of a national traumatic event that will require, in my view, and I'm sure Secretary Duncan would agree with this, and probably is working on it, a comprehensive strategy to respond. If we don't want generations of post-traumatic stress, disorders, psychotic problems, behavioral problems, addiction problems, we have to respond comprehensively and in a very aggressive way to the needs of our children right now.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Tim. And you mentioned post-traumatic stress, and that's something, Arne, that our kids are facing, but also our teachers. And, millions of teachers have left the profession over the past years because of trauma, or in part because of trauma. And I'm curious, can you talk about the silent crisis that our teachers are facing as it relates to trauma, and how that trauma may have been exacerbated over these past few years?
This is Tim said, as you know so well, Dr. Carpenter, this is just an extraordinarily difficult time. And it's interesting, people talk about, PTSD, post-traumatic. I'm not sure we're quite post anything yet. I think it's more, present and current. And so we're still working through all these things. So teachers who are dealing with the economic crisis, teachers who are dealing with the health crisis and the pandemic, teachers who are dealing with their own children and trying to educate them during this, dealing with systemic racism. There's a lot coming at them. And so, again, whether it's kids, whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, nobody's winning right now. And how we care for each other, how we put these tough issues on the table, how we put the mental health resources, front and center, and continue to remove stigmas for all of us. I'll speak for myself. This has been one, maybe the most challenging year of my life. Definitely one of them. There are times when I've really, struggled and been in a dark place. And I can honestly say it's probably a time I've never felt more inadequate. There's so much need, and you're doing everything you can every day, and it never feels like enough. And so we all have to take care of each other and continue to take care of each other. This is not, 2021 is fantastic. Speaking for probably all three of us, great to have a new administration in DC. We sort of have light at the end of the tunnel, but none of this stuff, do you flick a switch, does things get better right away? We're going to have to dig our way out of this for a long time and care for each other as best we can along that journey.
I think those are very, very wise words, Arnie. And Tim, can you talk about, why it's so hard for us to talk about trauma or mental health in our schools, in our country, in our culture? Because as you both mentioned, this has been an issue that's been facing us a long time. Why has it been so difficult for us to really talk about it as a country?
Pain is uncomfortable. It's as simple as that, honestly. Challenging inner feelings, challenging stories, challenging events in our lives are uncomfortable for people. And, I heard as a kid, and I think many of us heard, and some people still hear, move on. It's kind of a message, don't worry about it. Try to hide it. Try to assume or pretend it didn't happen, which is an extraordinarily destructive thing to say to a human being. I'm sorry to say, it was said to me, and I'm sure to many people who are watching. Move on. Don't worry about it. You're here now. Let's look for the bright side. That's not the way children feel safe. That's not the way children bond to adults. That's not the way children attach to ideas. We have long had an education system that's really based on a very, very old and very limited model, which is, I sometimes say it was built around the idea that schools were information transfer zones. You would walk in almost mechanically like a brain, and someone would bolt a piece of information into your brain. You'd learn the periodic table, or you'd learn the dates of the revolution, or you'd learn where to place the comma, as though you were on an assembly line. But that's not the way human beings learn. What schools are trying to become, in my view, are trying to become really much more places of inspiration transformation. Like, how do we grow and learn and hunger and want and be constantly in development? That's when you've got strong relationships where you feel seen and heard, where you're empowered to take action based on your own agency and needs, where you understand your identity and maybe the social and cultural challenges around you, but mostly where you feel seen and safe and capable of discovering your purpose. Those are different skills that our schools need to learn how to teach. We adults need to learn how to master those skills ourselves. Many of us trained as teachers never were taught anything about the social or emotional needs of children, not to mention our own. We just thought this was a different world. So, these are complicated and uncomfortable situations. But the good news is, in my view at least, every time we've seen teachers open up just a little bit to children, help them learn some stress management, help them learn some relationship skills, children flower. Children are very resilient, even in the face of very difficult circumstances. So if we can get over the original, sort of the initial hurdle here of recognizing that our children need support to address trauma and to address their larger fear of the future and the world around them, then schools become actually quite extraordinarily powerful places for inspiration and change. And that's where, I hear Secretary Duncan saying how tough it is now. And believe me, I have nothing different to offer on that point. We are in the midst. There's no post anything. We're in the middle of trauma. This is the middle of the conflict. But I think if we prepare now for the gradual reopening, which we all hope will come, and we have the strength to be honest with each other about how hard it's been and how much pain has been revealed and how much pain will persist if we don't change, then schools can become places that can be very much on the front edge of the change we all need to fight some of these long-term problems.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Tim. And Arnie, just based on what Tim said in terms of the difficulty of discussing trauma, how do we start to destigmatize discussions around mental health in our schools? Because right now, mental health is considered an issue for quote unquote crazy people. But if we were to do an examination of kids' brains, as Tim talked about earlier, they'd probably reveal that many kids or millions of kids would be diagnosed with, mental illness. So Arnie, how do we kind of destigmatize this so that we don't put up unnecessary roadblocks in our words or in our policies or in our structures or just in our biases and assumptions, so that we don't enable kids to fall through the cracks like they've been falling through as a result of COVID and so many other issues that is impacting their trauma?
Yeah, well, whether it's mental health, whether it's racial inequities that have been centuries in the making, whether it's health inequities that have been absolutely exposed now, whether it's educational inequities, all of this stuff has now come to the surface. Like all the stuff we maybe like to bury for a whole host of reasons, but for better or worse, because of what we've been through as a country, you can't hide from it anymore. You can pretend you don't see it. I guess you can keep your head in the sand, but it's all been laid bare. And I hate that we've gone through this. I hate that we've lost so many folks. I just lost another friend this weekend. So this stuff is unbelievably, personal and painful. But in a time of real difficulty, it does create a real urgent opportunity to put these tough things on the table. And I will say schools, even while they were physically closed, talking to superintendents and principals all the time, what they've done to feed kids every week has been extraordinary. And Tim and his team are part of a weekly call that we've done since March. Our schools are social safety nets. What they've done in terms of social and emotional health, telehealth, FaceTiming, texting. Not that it's easy, not that it's perfect, but people have gone way beyond the call of duty to step up and look out for students and try to take care of each other as well. So if there is a moment, it is now to continue to put these hard things out there, to talk them through. Not to, no one's going to fix them all tomorrow, but I actually really feel there's an openness to the conversation, a welcoming of a conversation, and a destigmatization of, again, whether it's systemic racism, whether it's mental health, whether it's health inequities, whether it's educational inequities. All those things are being talked about in a way that honestly I can't remember. And then for me, the next step is obviously the conversation is great, the conversation is welcome, the conversation is needed. It's really all about action. What are we willing to do differently? And for me, this is not rocket science. It's not trying to find a cure for cancer. It's not putting a man on Mars. Most of these things, we actually know what we need to do. It's whether we have the courage now to act. And I think the jury's still out, but I'm honestly more hopeful on all of these issues, probably more hopeful now, more optimistic than at any other time I can remember.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Arnie. And so, based on what Arnie just said, Tim, can you talk about some solutions that we can have? I think it's a perfect pivot point in terms of what he just said. What are some solutions we can have on the student level, on the school level, or on the policy level that long-term we can reverse this crisis of trauma that kids and teachers are facing?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to underscore something Arnie just said, and I think you've alluded to. We got to get out of this idea that our mental health is somehow something to be ashamed of or something. I like some of my colleagues in this field talk about mental wealth. Charlemagne the God has been talking about this. And people have been told for a long time, you use the word, you're crazy. That in and of itself has to be the first domino to fall. We all have stress. We all have fear. We all have pain. We all have down days. I'm so happy Arnie mentioned, hey, it's been tough for me. There's a strong, powerful, super well-known, successful, grown man in the United States of America saying, I'm having a hard time. Me too. Right now, all of a sudden, we're in new territory, right? It's no longer about those people. The field of social and emotional learning was built on the idea that we could build up the mental wealth of all children, not just focus on those children in more acute or painful points where they need therapy or treatment. It's a continuum. We all move in and out. Some days we're healthy, strong, self-confident. Next day we need some help. Guess what? Who doesn't feel that? That's all of us. So we've got to, the first thing is destigmatizing our inner lives. And I think that's a big project, but I don't think it should take that long. Arnie's right. We've got it now. It's right in front of us now. I mean, if we can't talk about it right now, shame on us. Shame on our leaders, shame on our educators, but they are talking about it. I'm on Zooms with teachers all the time. They're so freaking creative in how they're reaching kids and inviting kids and talking to kids about the stress of being at home or not being able to get out of the house or not being able to get to the playground, not being able to be on their sports teams, not being able to see their friends. Teachers are in these conversations all the time right now. So the first thing is destigmatization. I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but I think it's so important, not just for kids at risk, but for all of us, especially for those populations, as Charlemagne has said over and over again, who were told for a long time to avoid mental health, people of color in particular. Second thing is we've got to teach the skills and the values explicitly. sorry to say, because people hear that's an add-on. It's not an add-on. It's a way of teaching. Teach stress regulation, teach self-awareness, teach belonging, teach listening, teach purpose, teach service, teach values, teach grit, teach resilience, teach them specifically, and all the rest of the curriculum lights up with excitement. Avoid all those issues, and I'm sorry to say it's a dry, barren universe, and most kids put their head on the desk. So we've got to teach to the inner life and to the relational life of children. And then we've got to build the supports necessary for children to be successful, especially those community and family supports that would allow families and communities to work together with schools to provide communities of support as children grow and develop. So in some ways, I agree with Arnie. We're not trying to invent something, but the will necessary to really shift the paradigm towards a paradigm that's really about teaching and learning. I dare you to read any day the leading news in education and find the word teaching and learning in it. Almost all the news coverage of this field is about politics and payment and punishment. It's almost never about children. We have to change that if we're going to have a shot.
Well, thank you for that, Tim. That's very eloquent and well said. And Arnie, do you have any solutions as well you'd like to sort of mention? I know you mentioned a few in your last answer, but are there any things you want to add on to what Tim just described?
Two things. One, schools are social safety nets, and folks might think that's too much to ask for schools, and it is a lot, and schools can't do it by themselves. But I can't think of a better place to be a social safety net than our 100,000 schools in every neighborhood across the country. And it really is sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's start with, again, feeding. And I remember this from my mother's program going way back. She always said that if your stomach's grumbling, your stomach's rumbling, it's hard to learn. It's hard to concentrate. And every single day, as kids would walk into her program, she would feed them because they often didn't eat much during the school day. That was just the opening bid. And then you have to talk about the whole premise of this conversation about social and emotional health. And are kids dealing with fear? Are they dealing with trauma? Where are they? And then if you do those things, then let's talk about algebra trig and biology and everything else. And I think so often in education, we get these false debates. It's either or, it's college or careers, or it's, traditional or charter, whatever. In my mind, it's almost always 90%. It's always both and. And if we are feeding kids, if we're taking care of their physical health, if we're taking care of their social and emotional health, then we should always be pushing for the highest of academic standards. But those other things, those are like the foundation. That's the foundation to the house. And as Tim said, absent that, you have a house built on sand. It's not going to work. And you can preach high academic standards, you can preach all that. You're just honestly not in the game. But if you do these things, again, not in conflict, not in whatever, but complementary, and the two sides need each other desperately, the two sides of the same coin, then amazing things can happen in the most challenged families, communities, whatever it might be. Don't ever say these things prevent kids from learning. Just give them the resources and the tools and the skills and the love and the high expectations to help them be successful.
Thank you for sharing that. And final question for both of you. Human beings can live without a lot of things. They can live without big screen TVs or big cars or lots of things, but they can't live without hope. And so I was curious, could you share a word of hope or encouragement for teachers, for educators, for students, all across the country who are just dealing with it right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're all in it together. I would just say to all the teachers, all the kids, you may be in a very tough time. You may be struggling. You may feel frustrated by those around you, by your peers, by your supervisors, by your city, by your mayor, by your colleagues. You may be struggling with a lot of pain, but you are not struggling alone. And to the kids, your teachers do care. We don't always show it as best we should and as well as we should, but your teachers do care. Really, they do. They're trying. They want to be there for you. They went into this profession, the vast majority, because they actually love kids. They love you. And this is a great country, notwithstanding its enormous ills, notwithstanding all the ways in which it's fallen short. And we will get through this together, but we have to do it together. I think there's great hope in the opportunity to really change right now if we do it together.
Fantastic. Thank you. And same question to you, Arnie.
Yeah, I was a little bit late for this call. I apologize for keep you guys waiting, but I was just visiting one of the guys in our program, and I was, because this is top of mind. He's dropped out of high school very early on. Brother shot. He was shot at a bunch of times, never been hit. Served 4 years in jail. Eventually came into our program. Graduated from high school this fall. We did a drive-through graduation. He's now working full time, and he's sort of on a track to be a manager where he's working because he's always been a leader. So I just, in a tough time, I am always unbelievably hopeful and optimistic because I have the privilege every single day of seeing people who have been through literal hell, who have lived with trauma often their whole lives. But there's something redemptive about, again, about hope, about love, about opportunity, that transformation is possible. It's never straight, it's never linear. We have good days and tough days, but I literally just left talking with his employer, and she is so proud and talking about what he's going to do. And he was talking about the graduation. He just started laughing. He said, I never, ever in my life thought I'd graduate from high school, let alone be working any place but on the corner. So that's possible everywhere. It's not easy. It's not overnight. But we know when we work together, as Tim said, the amazing things our educators can do, our families can do, our kids can do. And again, I'm blessed to see that on a daily basis.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the South by Southwest United States of Trauma panel, and we'll kick it back to you.